Welcome to the Stucco Manufacturers Association Module 4 training program. Modules 1 and 2 covered lathing and flashing. Module 3 was materials and mixing. This module will talk about the hawk, the trowel, the derby, straight edge, float, and then we'll go into the plaster pumps. There will be personal and even regional preferences on how to apply stucco, top to bottom, left to right, right to left. We'll look at many of these practices. The SMA supports variation and application if it makes sense. However, there are some practices that are simply unable to be supported by the code, logic, or reason. We cannot support these practices. The art of plastering is a craft, skill, and art form. Plastering is one of the oldest known trade crafts in the world. You should take pride that you are part of history. While interior plastering has been essentially replaced by gypsum wallboard, the roots of plastering run deep in the United States. From interior plaster, specialty finished plasters to exterior stucco, plastering is not a homeowner or do-it-yourself craft. Whether applied by hawk and trowel or plaster pumps, the cement plaster coat provides a rigid shell that, properly applied, is resistant to moisture, cracking, and requires very little maintenance. Applying cement plaster over a well-applied lath will last the life of the structure. This is why people want stucco. We must deliver on that promise. This module will help you understand what makes cement stucco work and to avoid having issues. Stucco is an exterior cladding and fits all types of buildings and styles of architecture. Due to the variety of textures, long life cycle, and little to low maintenance requirements, options, and the ability for stucco to be a seamless finish, building owners love stucco. All these are great benefits and features, but they're meaningless when failures become the news. Stucco failures hurt the stucco industry and your future. This means it ultimately hurts you and the ability to house and feed your families. If you care about your future, your family, you must care about stucco, and you must help to ensure it does not fail. There are some basic rules to follow. The first lesson is to understand that stucco is often applied to masonry walls. The key to success is based on the adhesion of the cement plaster to the masonry substrate. The bond is reliant on a chemical reaction between the cement plaster and the masonry. As cement plaster cures, small crystals start to grow. These crystals will reach out and lock into the substrate. Because the surface of the concrete masonry unit, or CMU, is absorptive, the suction is perfect for cement plaster. Suction is a key for a good bond. In addition, the surface of the CMU is sufficiently rough for the crystals to grow and lock onto. There is a limit to this chemical and adhesive bond. Cement plaster is considered to weigh 12 pounds per square foot when applied at 7/8 inch thickness, and thus considered too heavy for a chemically adhesive bond. The maximum thickness for a cement plaster on a CMU masonry wall should be 5/8 of an inch of total thickness. Thicker plasters should have a lath. The lath provides the other key principle for a plaster called a mechanical key. While masonry ceilings are rare, concrete ceilings are fairly common. The industry recommends that on concrete ceilings only use skim coats of plaster. If you're concerned about the adhesion and bond to the concrete or masonry, you can use an approved bonding agent. Make sure this product is approved for concrete and for exterior use. Some bonders are only for interior use. Always follow manufacturer's instructions. You should also ask your supervisor before making any decision on your own. For example, if you're told to apply a thick cement plaster coating on a concrete ceiling, you should ask your supervisor, "Are you sure we should do this?" Then do as you're directed. The other method of plaster bonding to a wall is the use of a lath. This is called a mechanical key. The cement plaster surrounds the lath openings. This is called encasing the lath. While required for walls with a building paper or house wrap, lath can also be used on concrete walls when the plaster adhesion or bond is not enough to hold the plaster. Lath can also be applied over rigid foam sheathing to ensure a good mechanical key for the plaster. Good stucco requires the lath must be securely attached to the framing or substrate, and that the plaster encases the lath. Applying the first coat of cement plaster is called the scratch coat. The substrate is critical to understand the application and must ensure adhesion, bond, or keying of the cement plaster to the wall. In the case of masonry, it is the suction that achieves the bond. In the case of lath, it is the mechanical key of the plaster into the lath that is critical. The plaster must be pushed into the lath with sufficient force to ensure a key. The application of the scratch coat with a tool called a go devil or slicker may not provide sufficient force to ensure this key. While this may seem unimportant, there are homeowners who wonder why the stucco is falling off the lath. This kind of work hurts the stucco industry. It cannot be overstated. The scratch coat must be well keyed into the lath. Tools. The plasterer uses many tools to apply and finish plaster. Of course, the hawk and trowel are the primary tools used by the plasterer to efficiently apply mortar base coats and plaster finishes. The pointer and margin trowel are part of his arsenal and used to put plaster materials into very tight spaces. A variety of floats are used to compact base coats, bring out sands, or even create specialty textured finishes. To level the base coat, we can use a derby with handles, or the magnesium rod, or what we call a straight edge. The straight edge comes in a variety of lengths. 5 to 6 foot is the most commonly used. Specialty tools can include the pipe trowel. This special tool helps reach behind tight areas like stair treads or groupings of pipes that run along the wall. A large brush is also useful to wipe down trims or add water for troweling. As a professional plasterer, you will want to collect quality tools and protect your tools. Remember, buy quality tools and keep them clean. The trowel may seem to most people that one trowel is just like another, but for plasterers, they are typically very special and unique to them. A trowel is essentially the extension of your hand, and each plasterer will have his favorites. For example, there are many types of trowels. Most are rectangular, but for example, we have the pool trowel with rounded edges. And while a traditionalist may be offended by the use of a pool trowel for plastering, there's nothing wrong to use them for applying plaster. The pool trowel is used to smooth trowel curves and corners like the bottom of a swimming pool. Most plasterers will have a pool trowel for smooth finishes or for curved surfaces. Trowels can come in a variety of sizes and have different shank lengths. The shorter the shank, the more flexible the trowel. The longer the shank means the trowel will be stiffer. The handle of the trowel is a personal choice. The straight shank or camelback or even a cushion trowel are all fine for plastering. Wet cement is caustic. This means it can and will burn your skin over time. The best protection is to keep your skin covered and dry. Many think moisturizers or petroleum jelly will solve the problem. They do help coat and protect your skin, but they cannot reverse the alkalinity of the wet cement. Over time, you will get cement burns if left unattended. The best course of action is to neutralize the alkalinity of the cement with a vinegar. Another practical solution is to bring an orange to work in your lunchbox. Oranges are slightly acidic and will also neutralize the cement. You can squeeze the orange over the affected area to prevent cement burns. There are many types of scaffold used for plastering across the United States. There are regional preferences to type, style, and methods of scaffolds used. Regardless of the scaffold, type, or style, safety is paramount. The Office for Occupational Safety is called OSHA, and they require that all employees who work on scaffold be trained by persons qualified to recognize hazards associated with the type of scaffold being used. All scaffolds over 6 feet in height require guardrails, and many will have bracings to support that scaffold. Always check to see that bracings and guardrails are in place and secure before climbing on to a scaffold. It is not uncommon on projects to have other trades remove bracing that make scaffolds unsafe. This can put you at risk. In addition, you should not remove bracing or rails either. Only qualified scaffold installers are allowed to erect and dismantle scaffold. Injuries to our trade workers are most often caused from scaffold-related issues. Do not let this happen to you. If you are not trained to erect and dismantle scaffold, you are not allowed to do this type of work. Finally, make sure the work surface is properly planked for you to work on. It should be clean and clear. Do not work on planks with ice, snow, or other materials that can result in slips or falls. Applying base coat cement can be done by using hand tools or by a machine. The means of application is not as important as the end result. Both methods of application are SMA approved. Cement plaster is called by many names. Mud, mortar, mix, or mezcla, which is the Spanish term for mixture, are often used. The ratio of sand and cement and lime should follow ASTM standards or be a pre-mixed product. The consistency is controlled by how much water is added to the mix. The plasterer applying the mortar has the final say as to the consistency of the mix. Generally, most plasterers prefer a consistency similar to that of soft serve ice cream as a guide. The HUD carrier, or plaster tender, typically delivers the mix to what is called a mudboard. This is a board or sheet of sturdy plywood with cut or angled corners. This board is placed on a mortar or mud stand. This puts the plaster at a more convenient level and workable height for the plasterer. Wheelbarrows and a No. 2 style shovel work best to deliver the mortar. The mudboard should be pre-wet before loading it with plaster. Once the mix is on the mudboard, the plasterer will load the hawk. The hawk is set on the mudboard and the trowel is used to draw the mix to the hawk. The excess is removed from the edges and put back on the mudboard. This is to prevent waste. Every plasterer will have a slight variation to this process, but they all work to load the hawk. Taking the mud from the hawk with the trowel is first learned by tilting the hawk slightly with the trowel behind the plaster mix. This prevents the mix from being dumped on the apprentice plasterer. Once skills are developed, the plasterer will learn to take the mixture from the front of the hawk. This is faster and better for production and ergonomically better for the plasterer's body. It does take time to learn the skill, but like riding a bike, it is a skill that is never lost. At regular speed, it can be hard to see if the plasterer is taking the mix from the front or the back of the hawk. Done properly, it appears effortless and allows the plasterer to work many years without hurting their body. Cement plaster can also be delivered by a machine called a plaster pump. There are many types of pumps used to apply plaster. Stator tube and piston pumps are the most common. Some pumps are considered high-volume plaster pumps and capable to pump over 200 bags of 94-pound bag cement blended with 50 ton of plaster sand per day. This is equivalent to over 2,000 yards or 18,000 square feet of scratch coat per day. These are called gun crews, and they require a team of anywhere from 9 to 11 skilled workers, each having their own assigned task on the crew. These large piston-style pumps are often a mortar mixer and pump all in one trailerable unit. Plaster mixes for pumping cement will be slightly richer in cement and use more water than mixes used for hand tool application. This is to properly lubricate the hose and the recognition that some water will be lost by the time that plaster mix is sprayed out of the nozzle. This machine contains a mixer bowl where the cement, sand, and lime are added, a water tower that dispenses a pre-measured amount of water to each batch of cement plaster, a hopper that the blended cement is then poured into, a large pumping engine with an air compressor, gears, and camshaft to pump the plaster. This is the manifold, or sometimes called the pumping unit, where the cement plaster is drawn in from the hopper and then pushed out to the hose. Once the plaster is at the end of the hose, it reaches the nozzle. An airline is added at the nozzle to atomize and help spray the plaster. A rubber cap and orifice are placed at the end of the nozzle. The orifice comes in different sizes and helps regulate the pattern and is placed within the rubber cap. This is a safety feature that allows it to pop off should the mixture become clogged. The shield is the sign of a true plaster production pump. The volume of the material and air are significant that go through the hose, and the spray pattern would be too wide and extremely messy. The shield controls and focuses the spray into a concentrated area. Here we can see the hopper filled with cement plaster. On the back side of the manifold, we can see the rocker arms that work to draw in and push the plaster through the manifold. The Rotor stator type plaster pump is widely used in many parts of the world. While they cannot match the volume output of the large piston style plaster pumps, they can increase production over hand tool applications and typically can run with smaller crew sizes. This makes them ideal for many parts of the country. The Rotor stator tube plaster pump operates using a steel rotor that pushes the plaster through a stator tube. The plaster is drawn into the tube and conveyed along the tube and then pushed out to the hose. It is very efficient and provides an extremely uniform spray pattern. This is why plasterers have always preferred this type of pump for cement spray finishes over the piston style pump. It is commonly used for dash finishes. The piston style plaster pump works on a similar principle of the two-cylinder piston engine. The pistons in this engine move up and down. While the pistons on the plaster pump move back and forth. The two pistons are either pulling or pushing the plaster mix through the manifold unit and its two main chambers. The key parts in these manifold chambers are the balls that move to open and close the chamber, the seats that the balls conceal against, and the center pins that prevent the balls from being pushed through the manifold chamber. All of these parts work together to control the flow of the plaster mix and ensure that it moves only in one direction. Because the mix is made with abrasive sand that is rushing through this unit, these parts will wear down and need regular servicing. The piston action is powerful and provides high plaster mix output. It is not as smooth as the rotor and stator tube style machine. The machine can be modified to shoot finished plaster. However, most plaster experts agree the rotor stator is superior for finish coat plaster applications. Regardless of the style of pump, it is critical to take care of the pumps, understand how they work, and properly maintain the parts that need regular servicing. Do not remove any safety devices and always follow manufacturer's instructions. Regardless of how the cement plaster is applied, the first coat is the scratch coat and should substantially cover the lath. While it is wet and workable, it is scored with a notch trowel, comb, brush, or scarifier. This should be done predominantly in horizontal direction, not leaving large ridges or lines. You should work to fill in corners rather than toss the material on the ground. Brushes are essential to wiping corners. The This keeps trims clean and ensuring the scratch coat does not protrude beyond any grounds and keeping interior corners tight. The scratch coat is half the work of the complete brown or base coat. It makes no sense to cheat on it. What is important is to get good coverage that is well keyed in the lath and that the grounds or trim accessories are clean. This allows the plasterer to run the Darby or rod on the brown coat. While coverage is important, perfection is not expected. Voids in corners or even some lath showing through the finished scratch coat is not a problem. The brown coat will fill these areas with no difficulty. It is also not uncommon to look closely at the full and thick scratch coat that is cured and see some minor shrinkage cracks. This is because the scratch coat can be a little richer in cement as allowed by code. This is not a problem. What is a problem is leaving the trims improperly wiped down. This corner was not wiped when the cement was fresh and soft. Now it required chipping the cement plaster, and this can damage the corner trim. A simple, easy task was missed that seemed to be no big deal. Yet when the cement hardened, it becomes a very big deal. This is cement plastering, and not like doing drywall or other weak materials. It is important to make it right the first time. A good scratch coat should be well embedded into the lath. This means with sufficient pressure to be well keyed into the lath. The scratch coat should be a nominal 3/8 inch in thickness. This does not mean a maximum or minimum thickness of cement. It means approximately or in name only. What is important is that the cement is well keyed into the lath and that it substantially covers the lath. As noted, 100% coverage of the lath is not required, but the cement should substantially be covering the lath. The keying of the brown coat are the score lines. They should be predominantly horizontal in direction. Do not allow bulges that protrude beyond the established plaster grounds, such as casing beads, corner aids, or other screeds. Properly done, a scratch coat makes an excellent base for the second or brown coat. The code states that the scratch coat should be moist cured for 48 hours before applying the brown coat. Cement needs this moisture to cure and get hard. In most cases, the mixed water will be sufficient to cure the cement, and water curing may not be needed. However, in warm weather, the mixed water can evaporate too quickly. When it is warm and windy, this can make the situation more desperate. Then it becomes necessary to damp cure the cement with water. Putting the brown coat on the scratch within 48 hours can also help moist cure the scratch coat. But if the code said 48 hours needed cure time, how can we do that? The code allows for the second or brown coat to be applied to the scratch coat as soon as the first or scratch coat has attained sufficient rigidity to receive the brown coat. This was put in the building code when stucco was more common on open stud framing, and allowed the plaster to apply the brown coat the next day. Over solid sheathed walls, this can even be done the same day as rigidity is there due to the backing of the sheathing. Applying the brown coat is essentially the fill coat. Application is similar to the first coat and may be done by hand tool or by the plaster pump. In both cases, the cement will then be leveled, rodded, or darby using the established plaster grounds and the skill of the plasterer to create a flat wall. Care should be taken not to waste plaster material. This will require the plasterer to move the material from high spots to low spots. The goal is a flat wall. As the brown coat loses its excess mixed water, it can then be floated, shaved, and made ready for the finish coat. The tool called the Darby has handles to make the initial leveling the wall a little easier. The rod is a stiffer type straight edge and produces a more flat surface. Regardless of the tool used for initial leveling, it is hard work and best done immediately after the application to the scratch coat. The plaster brown coat is then made flat using the straight edge or rod against the ground, such as corner aids or corner beads, as the guide for the plaster to use in establishing a good brown coat. Open or large panels will require high spots to be shaved. This is when the plasterer should turn his straight edge at an angle to the wall. This ensures the rod is not merely riding along an uneven wall, but creating a flat surface. You must use the edge of the rod to establish and make the wall flat. Note the angle of the rod to the wall. Interior corners do not typically have trims or grounds to follow. It is recommended to leave them a little full or fat during the initial rod or darbing process. Then, using the rod or straight edge, they can be cut to create a nice straight angle. This is another area of skill exhibited by a journeyman plasterer. This is done by sliding the rod into the corner from one side and then in from the other side, as the excess plaster will slide down. This will leave a nice straight interior corner. The final task in brown coating is floating. This is more important than most plasterers understand. There are 3 objectives that are met by properly floating the brown coat. First is the densification of the cement plaster. This is a term used in ASTM, and it means to compact the plaster. The correct tool is a wood, cork, or any hard float. The action is a circular motion and only requires light to moderate pressure. The key to floating is the hard float and timing. Floating too soon will move the plaster and result in a wavy or bumpy surface. Too late and floating will not be able to happen, and you'll be forced to scrape the walls. Scraping is called dry rotting and allowed per ASTM, but it takes more time to complete the wall. Once the wall is densified by the hard floating process, it becomes more crack resistant. It also becomes more water resistant. Most plaster pump manufacturers will state the nozzle should be at a 90-degree angle to the wall. For many areas, it will be better to angle the nozzle upwards. This will help the plaster better hold to the surface. While the Darby and rod is best for larger areas, a trowel will be needed in small, tighter areas. After the cement loses its excess mix water and cutting the angles and floating is done, there's no rule against innovation. Many plasterers will use templates to form shapes and keep margins at a uniform thickness. This can be as simple as a block of wood used to ensure the margin between the window and the arch is the same around the entire window. This is an example of why plastering is a skilled trade. There is no substitute for experience. Plastering is dirty and hard work. It is important to leave the site as clean as possible each day. After applying cement, the excess or waste plaster must be washed from roofs and decks. Spoils should be pulled away from the foundation approximately 12 inches. You should also walk the brown coat and look for any needed repairs. It is not uncommon to find what are called wash or dropouts that should be patched in before leaving the site for the day. The brown coat on a 3-coat plaster must cure 7 days prior to applying the finish coat. Damp curing may be required during hot weather. and is certainly required during hot, dry, windy weather. This is best done in the morning or in the evening. Failure to damp cure when it is hot and dry can always be done later. However, waiting even a few days can mean it will require more water and more frequency. This is the end of Module 4. In Module 5, we will cover foam shapes. We'll look at the installation of the base and mesh over your brown coat that can significantly reduce cracking. We will look at the new one-coat CI systems with some application tips. And of course, we will cover the finish coat application of stucco. We will also have some very useful trade tips on how to make a smooth trowel cement finish look almost perfect. For those wanting a certificate of completion, you must pass a written exam after Module 5. Please contact the SMA office for more information.